hope that by the end of this series, you'll know much more about this, your brain, and how it works, and also that you'll be able to use it far more effectively. During the series, I'm going to be talking about expanded use of your memory and its almost infinite capacity, about how to use your vision far more effectively, both in general terms and for more functional uses like reading. I'm also going to be discussing the organization of time, learning and study, and things like life in general. Recent discoveries in the fields of psychology, biology, and education have shown that the brain is an infinitely more complex and organized organism than we had ever realized before. Imagine yourself making a telephone call. You can now dial virtually anyone in the world. Anyone can dial you, everyone can dial everyone. The number of interconnections is so vast as to be almost unimaginable. That is even minute compared with the interconnections your brain can make. But let's put some real perspective on unimaginable numbers. Here you are, pretty substantial in your own eyes, about to go on a trip through the universe. Let's relate the distance we're traveling and the number of atoms, the smallest building units in our universe, to the number of cells and possible interconnections of your brain. You are already less than an insignificant speck. The Earth is disappearing fast, and we're on our way to the planets. We're now leaving the sun, 100 million miles from home, one with 8 noughts after it, but we have more brain cells than this. About now, we've traveled 10,000 million miles, one with 10 noughts after it. That's how many individual units there are in the human brain. Let's continue our journey and try to think about the number of atoms that build this vast structure, our universe. By the end of this journey, we will have traveled in miles, one with 20 noughts after it. That's 100 million, million miles. The number of atoms is 1 with 100 noughts after it. You can calculate that number in millions if you like. The brain, remember, has 10,000 million cells. The number of interconnections these cells can make is infinitely greater than the number of atoms in the universe. Not 1 with 100 noughts, but 1 with 800 noughts after it. Just try writing that out, and you will see how phenomenally vast it is. So you see, we all have inside our heads an organism with the most enormous potential. But looking around, you might say, where's the evidence of all that potential? In answer to that question, I ask a question myself, and that is, have we ever really investigated it? Have we even devised the most simple operating manual? Think of your formal education. Ask yourselves the following questions. In school, were you taught how your eyes can scan print, getting all kinds of different information from it? Were you told about the different speed your eyes can travel? Were you taught about the nature of your memory, why it forgets things, how it records things, how it can record things better? Were you taught special study techniques which would enable you to relate, not just to your own subject, but to any subject with confidence? Were you taught the nature of problem solving? Were you taught to think creatively? Were you taught to think? The answer to all these questions is usually no. So it's not surprising that we have difficulty in concentration, that we have difficulty in motivating ourselves to learn, that we have difficulty in studying, that we have difficulty with selection and rejection, that we have difficulty with simple getting down to things, that we find it almost impossible to organize, that, in other words, we find it difficult to use our heads. Who then is to blame for all this? The parents and teachers, the schools, the education authorities, the media, the child? The answer, I think, is that no one is to blame. Very seldom does a parent or a teacher set out to actively stifle or bore a child to death. Most efforts at education are sincere, an attempt to bring the child out to help him develop. The problem lies in the fact that we have really very little information up to now as to how to relate to our own minds. Very little information. Speculation, yes. Take the Greeks. They were in the dark as far as the mind was concerned. They thought that it was either some form of strange spirit, or that it functioned as a result of different pressures in the body from liquid or air currents. In fact, they didn't know where it was situated. Aristotle, who was the first of the scientific experimenters, said that most of the functions we now attribute to the brain were located in the heart. After the Greeks, nothing much happened until the 16th century, when philosophers racked their brains trying to find out where they were. About 200 years ago, the brain was finally centered in the head and realized to be responsible for thinking, memory, and learning. We now know that it also has connections that go down the neck into the body, that it has very refined biochemical networks, that it generates a mass of electrical impulses. Nearly every area of knowledge is finding itself involved with brain research. And yet, even now, we are still very ignorant about it. The more we investigate it, the more we find out that we don't know. The more we try to pin it down, the more it evades our grasp. The more we actually learn about it, the more we realize what an extraordinary complex organism it is. I've already mentioned that the number of brain cells is almost infinite, especially the number of interconnections they can make. But there are a number of other simple but fascinating facts. Your brain, this, weighs only about 3 pounds, approximately 2% of your whole body weight, and yet it uses 20% of all the energy that your body takes in, especially oxygen. Also, some rather amusing facts. You see with your eyes at the front of your body. The seeing center of your brain, the occipital lobe, is located at the back. There are other interesting things about this as well, especially in relation to memory. It seems that the memory of a mind, memory of a brain mind, is perhaps almost infinite. There are some simple evidences for this, and you can think about your own experiences, which scientists now believe are beginning to confirm this. It seems that when we take in an experience, it's registered forever. And if you think about walking into a room and suddenly experiencing a smell that you haven't smelt for years, that smell will trigger off all kinds of memories, all kinds of associations in your mind, and you will get a complete, immediate, direct recall of what happened. Now, the happening was by chance, and yet your recall was perfect. So it suggests that that chance recall is located in secret pockets, and there are many more secret pockets than we now realize. These secret pockets are also brought out in things like dreams. We all have to dream, in fact, in order to survive, although some of us don't actually recall them the next morning, but we all do dream. And those of you who remember them will recall that very often you will dream about an event or a person that you hadn't thought of for years and years and years, and suddenly up they pop in a dream. This is again evidence that your brain is storing it all and using it for some later instance. So there's an enormous amount that we don't know. Taking what we do know about this organism, which is now an increasing amount of knowledge, we can begin to change the way in which we think about our learning abilities. We can begin to re-look at the way we learn to learn, and can begin to look again at the way that we develop. First, we must go back through our lives, through each stage of our growth and development. Down through the early years of childhood, right back to where the process starts in the womb. In the womb, the brain is helping to coordinate the development of the child and is preparing the senses for when they actually confront the world. At first, all is sensory confusion. All hearing is one confused sound. All smell is one general smell. All vision is a blur. In the first 2 weeks, the baby begins to refine all these senses. Sounds become more meaningful. Sights begin to develop. The blur begins to disappear and shapes emerge. After a really rough passage at birth, it's amazing what the baby accomplishes in his first few days. Watch this baby move. These are not uncoordinated movements. They are rhythms beginning to coordinate muscles. Sounds are being coordinated. Breathing is developing. Rhythm is being integrated into the child. Basic needs within the first week are already beginning to be satisfied. New sensations, many of them enjoyed, are experienced. Muscles are still coordinated. Taste takes place. Motion, activity, sight. Even when placed on an unstimulating environment, the child feels, moves its muscles, continues to learn, to explore. And finally, when we stuff him into a pram where he can hardly move at all, and even take away his toys, he still manages to smile. So every baby is a phenomenon, as every mother knows. And each one of you, having been a baby, was also therefore a phenomenon. Now, what a baby actually accomplishes in the first few years of its life is an absolutely extraordinary series of learning processes. And each one of you, sitting out there in the audiences, has gone through this. After learning basic muscular coordination, basic breathing, vision, the 5 fundamental senses, the child learns to crawl, and then very, very rapidly learns to walk. And at approximately the same stage, he does something else which is extraordinary as well, and that is that he learns the use of words. Now, people take this for granted, but if you actually think about the process, you realize that it's far more complicated, that you have done something far more complicated than really we give the baby credit for the ability to do. If you imagine yourself having no knowledge of what language is at all, having no knowledge of the individualness of words, being confronted by adults who are speaking. Listen to me now, for example, speaking, and you will find that most of the words are run into each other so that there's no real distinction between the individual units of the words. Now, the baby is surrounded by this from the beginning of his life, and yet very rapidly he begins to distinguish, and this in the face of disadvantages. We go to the cot and we say, "Ah, coochie coochie coo, in your lovely little darling," which doesn't really help him to learn vocabulary, and he distinguishes those things which are important to him at an early stage from those things which are general noise around him. Now, the mathematical, calculating, organizing, remembering ability that every child goes through in learning its basic language is absolutely enormous. So, no matter how unphenomenal you may feel, we've all learned to cope with our environment. We've all learned to speak at least one language. We've developed refined sensibilities of hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and seeing. We've all learned a number of basic survival techniques. We've learned to store an enormous amount of information and to control millions of coordinated muscle movements. And we've all learned that things are not always what they seem to be by relating their size in space. What are the basic mechanisms that a baby uses in its initial learning? He connects things to each other. His first words are mummy, go, me, toy. He learns about colors and shapes and numbers. The more he learns, the more he will connect, and so build up a rapidly increasing store of knowledge. He can connect pictures and words much earlier than we give him credit for. He could comfortably read by the age of 2 if given encouragement, as some children are given. As an adult, our pattern making is very similar to that in our childhood. We still use the same 5 basic senses. We still make the same kinds of connections as we did in our childhood. The difference is that in our childhood, the whole store is fresh. It's new information that the child is taking in. What he is doing is taking totally new pieces of information, observing them, storing them, filing them, beginning to integrate them, starting to make sense of things as he learns, using things in words, starting to become aware of the differences between colors. What we do, as I've said, is exactly the same thing, but we do it with a more expanded store of knowledge. Now, this can be an advantage, but it can be a disadvantage. If we use, as adults, that expanded store of knowledge and simply continue to go down the same lines, we become boring or rigid or stuck in our ways, set in our ways. This isn't necessary, and you can see by looking at the child, at the innocence of his expression, at the freshness of the relationships that he makes, that the learning process is the same, but that the way that we begin to connect things can alter as you grow older. Now, what we learn from this is that we can learn more from the child. The child is still making sense connection. Look at the way that a child paints or learns, and you'll find that he has all senses going in at the same time, where experience we say, oh yes, well that's definitely this one, or that's definitely this one. The child is in fact making more use of his learning capacities. So we can learn from the child learning. If we make use of these capacities, rather than stifling them and holding them down, the whole process of learning and of education and the use of our minds can be improved, as long as we are given the proper guidelines. And that is what I hope to do in this series, and to show that at any age you can change your mind. And if that mind is still suspended, At the end of that cosmic zoom, this is how some people think their eyes move when they are reading. Other people think that they move like this, but actually neither of these is correct. Later I'll be talking about how the eye does work, but first let's do a quick reading test and then talk about what reading really is. So do you have a book? If you haven't, don't get into a panic. We'll give you 15 seconds, and meanwhile our holographic observer will be keeping an eye on you. Okay, ready to go. I'd like you to read in the way you normally read for 1 minute, starting now. Okay, that's it. Now I want you to roughly calculate the number of words per minute that you read during that reading. Do that by averaging the number of words on a line, and then multiplying that number by the number of lines that you actually read during your reading. Don't be too precise about this. We don't want to know down to the word or half a word, just a rough estimate of your words per minute. Right. Now, most people on that kind of test score between about 90 and about 400 words per minute. The average is somewhere between about 200 and 250. But we can improve on all those speeds if we use our visual potential. Now, usually we don't, and so most of us experience the regular range of reading problems. We find it difficult to concentrate. We usually find that we're too dependent on the sounds of the words as we read. And we also find that we skip back to words, and sometimes to paragraphs, and sometimes to entire books, because we've somehow missed them. So first then, let's look at what the reading process really is. The information around us is coded into symbols, and reading is the way you interact with those symbols. Those symbols are not necessarily always words. What that really refers to is the way in which you absorb, understand, remember the information that comes to you from books, television, newspapers, diagrams, graphs, and so on. . We can break this reading process down into a number of steps. The first one is the ability to recognize, to know what the symbols are. If you don't, then you can't interact with them. Most of you watching this program will know the English alphabet and English words. Secondly is the ability to register, to take in the information. This is a physical process. The light hits the word, bounces off into your eye, goes through to the retina, travels via the optic nerve, and then is finally received by your brain. Next comes assimilation. To comprehend, we must be able to relate the parts to each other. And then we must be able to relate what we have just assimilated to the body of information that we already possess. No, this does not mean open your umbrella or that an elephant has just passed by. You know that that is a road sign meaning men at work. Now let's try another illustration. Consider the farthest distance man has traveled, that is, the distance to the moon, 250,000 miles. This may seem enormous. But if you already know something about the solar system, then you know that 250,000 miles is relatively minute. And our entire solar system just disappears in the universe. So the knowledge that you already have in your mind does change very much the things you've comprehended. These 4 stages, recognition, registration, comprehension, and integration, are not the end of the reading process. We must retain what we have learned and be able to recall it as and when we need it. I'll be talking about retention and recall in a later program. But finally, of course, there's not much point in having done all of this unless you can use it. Use it in speaking, in writing, in artistic or graphic representation, by some form of bodily expression, and of course, using it for yourself, communicating with yourself, commonly known as thinking. This then is our new definition of reading. Up to now, we've tended to think too much of it as being simply related to the print. This has caused difficulties, and now in England there are 2 million adult illiterates, and many, many people who can't make use of even the limited reading skills that they do have. In our tremendously print-oriented society, this causes considerable distress. But why all this difficulty? First, let's look at how children are taught to read in schools.
Good girl. Come round this way. You can see what we're doing. You point to it and listen. Now you read it for her as well.
We use many methods. One of the most popular is the phonic, in which the child is taught the alphabet, then the sounds of the letters, and these are finally blended into words. There's the look-say, in which the child is given a picture with the word underneath it, so that he becomes to associate the picture with the word, and finally to recognize the word on its own. There are new approaches like the ITA, the initial teaching alphabet. This uses different letters, each one connected to each sound in our language. And there are a variety of others using colors, sentences, and blends of all the other methods.
Good. Can you read it for him?
I am John.
Oh, those are lovely. Lovely. Now, can you put those words back for me? Is he right with this one? Is that the right word, John?
No.
No? Can you make it right? Well, come and see if you can then.
No matter how good these traditional methods are, and some of them are very good, they deal only with the first stages of reading, recognition and registration. Once the child has recognized and learnt the symbols, he's left on his own. I am sure you remember this stage. But were you after this taught how to comprehend, how to understand, how to analyze and criticize what you were reading?
That's right.
how to select and reject, how to note, how to retain, how to recall. In other words, most of the problems that people experience are not because of any personal failing, but because the education process stops short. And even in the first two stages, recognition and registration, there's much that we are not taught, especially about our eyes. These two diagrams here show objects being seen from a distance and seen from near. Here, the light comes in at a fairly small angle. The lens does not need to bend much. The rays are directed towards the retina where the image is received. In this lower one, the angle of light is greater, so the lens has to adjust in order to accommodate that, and then the image is once again received properly on the retina. Now, what is interesting also about these and the lens's ability is not that it can only do it, but that it can do it so rapidly. You can look at something far away and then instantly look at something very close, and you don't go through a blurry period. Your perception is immediate and clear. So the ability of your lens to adjust is quite phenomenal. Looking a bit more closely then at these receivers of light, we find that the eye is in fact the bud of a large optical nerve. Light goes in through the pupil, travels through the transparent lens, and registers the image on the retina, the large area at the back of the eye. The retina contains an enormous number of cones and rods. Cones are those cells which are receptive to color and very clear form. The rods are your night perceptors, I think is perhaps the best way to call them. Your cones are concentrated in an area here called the fovea. This is where most of your sharp color perception takes place. Around the peripheries are the rods. Now, the rods, as I mentioned, are for your night vision. If therefore you're wanting to look at something at night, don't look directly at it, but look slightly away from it, and you will see it more clearly because it will be registered on the rods, not the cones. Now, the total number of rods and cones in one of your eyes is 130 million. There's also an interesting point in your eye here where the optic nerve enters the retina. This is a blind spot. There are no cells there ready to receive images. You can test this blind spot by taking a piece of paper, marking a little X and a little naught about an inch away from each other, and then moving them around with one eye closed, concentrating on one. You'll find that as you move, at a certain place, one of them disappears. That means that you have found the blind spot. Now, because you have two eyes, they cancel each other's blind spots out. Controlling this whole organism, like the reins that control a horse's head, are 8 muscles of the eye. Now, the muscles of your eye do the most extraordinary job. They coordinate the tracking of every image that you ever see, and they also coordinate with each other. So you have, with your eyes, the most enormously complicated system of muscles, nerve cells, light receptor cells, which work in a visual harmony to make sure that you see things clearly and accurately. Now, what's important about the muscles and your eyes is that the muscles direct your eyes to the things that they see, and if they don't, you don't see. So if the image is moving, the muscles direct your lens to move with the image. If the image is still, the muscles keep the lens still. If the image is still and the muscles move the lens, your vision becomes a blur. See what happens when your eye moves without a pause. Now, you probably had a bit of difficulty reading that because of the blur and probably picked up only a few words. But before discussing that, I want to digress with a brief test. I'm going to ask you to remember a list of words that I'm going to read you from this book. A, dog. Ran. A, cross. On. To. The. Pave. Meant. But. Never. The. Less. Now, you're probably getting pretty bored with that already. But a dog ran across onto the pavement, but nevertheless is a simple sentence. Now, that was how the slow reader reads, one word at a time, sometimes even less than one word at a time. So it's no wonder that his concentration, his appreciation, his interest, all are low. A fast or more efficient reader takes in more words with each eye grasp. So he consequently has a smoother flow of information. Read this. Assimilation and comprehension are obviously improved. So how can you learn to read faster? First, consciously try to read fast by taking in more words with each eye fixation. Try it again. So what else can we do to aid our eyes? Try imagining a perfect circle in front of your eyes and then guide your eyes around it with no help whatsoever, similar to what I'm going to do now. You'll probably find that your eyes, like mine, described a rather battered rectangle rather than a circle. Now try following this dot, and you will find your eyes make a far better circle. You can try doing this with your own finger or in partnership with a friend. But how does all this relate to reading? Well, quite simply, we can use a visual guide when we read. Try this. Many children naturally use their fingers when they read. You see them with the finger on the page. We tell them to take it off because we think it slows them down or messes up the book, when in fact what we should be asking them to do is to speed the thing up. If you use a visual guide, it gives you more comprehension, more appreciation, a better flow, so you can start using it now. Or what other ways are there of improving the reading speed? Well, firstly, we can vary the use of the visual guide. Rather than having it just going along the pages one line at a time like this on the page, you can lift it off slightly, which enable your eyes to focus a bit more softly, getting more words in. So have it slightly off the page. You can also vary the use of your visual guide. It doesn't just have to go down the lines. It can go in spirals and curves. Your eyes will make the proper fixations, picking in the right word groups as your visual guide goes down the page. You can also try moving down the margins. In other words, try as many variations of the visual guide as possible. Now, there are other things you can do to help your speed of reading, and one is to practice reading too fast. That is for almost no comprehension at all. So you start off reading at a normal speed and gradually accelerate until you're reading almost nothing at all, simply seeing the occasional words and phrases go by. Don't stop, carry on, and complete something like 5 pages doing this. Then go back and read normally, and you'll find that your reading speed is higher. The reason for this can be found by comparing it with a motorway analogy. If you've been driving at 70 miles an hour for some time, and somebody in the front seat says, look, I'm covering up the speedometer, slow to 20. How fast do you think you'll be going when you say that's about 20? Most people answer somewhere between about 30 and 40. Now, this is because the mind has got used to 70, and when it comes down to 30, that feels like about 20 used to. So the mind becomes conditioned to a new, higher norm. This is what happens when you practice for no comprehension, just very briefly. Your mind gets conditioned, then comes back down and goes down to a speed which is higher than you've normally used before. So you can use this speed training to slowly rise or give rise to a higher normal reading speed. Now you can take this even farther and actually really speed through a book. That means reading at about 1 page a second. Now what you're going to be doing there is simply scanning the page as quickly as you can, something like this. 1, 2, turn, down the next page, down the next page, and so on. And you can use a metronome to help you with this. I set this metronome on approximately 90, and it can be used as so. And of course, as you get better and better and better, you can pull the speed up and end up at phenomenally fast speed, a bit of a limp in that metronome. Now, what happens when you're using the metronome is that your eye's focus begins to expand, and it picks out the key words and key phrases which are really important, and it begins to use a different kind of perception. It's no longer using simply the normal look at the word, focus on it, and taking it in. It's letting the mind look around what the eye is generally seeing. So it's seeing on the edges, using its peripheral vision. This is tremendously important in your advanced reading techniques, and you'll find that it will increase your speeds very, very significantly. Right. Now, the printed word, as I've said, is only a part of the reading process. We actually get information from everything around us. And so what we want to try to do is to train our eyes to stop just seeing and to start really looking. Looking for shapes, textures, colors, relationships of shapes, expanding their awareness. In other words, use your eye. It's your window on the universe, and the more you use it, the more you will see, and the more you will learn. I'm going to read you a list of 10 numbers and 10 words. I want you to remember the number and the word that goes with it. Number 2 is light. Number 5 is student. Number 10 is face. Number 4 is watch. Number 7 is floor. Number 6 is color. Number 9 is road. I hope they're not all beginning to drift away. Number 1 is orange. Number 8 is table. Number 3 is glass. I want you to pick up your pens to answer some questions. And don't write yet, because the first question that I want you to answer is, what is the number between 1 and 10 that you think I might have left out during that list? And then I want you to write down the number 5 and the word that went next to it. Number 1 and the word that went next to it. Number 9 and the word. Number 2 and the word. Number 10 and the word. Number 4 and the word. Number 7 and the word. Number 3 and the word. Number 6 and the word. And finally, number 8 and the word. Now, check your answers. Don't worry if you didn't do too well on that test. Most people, in fact, score only between about nothing and 4. By the end of the program, I hope to have given you a system which will enable you to get a perfect score on fairly simple tests such as that. But next I want to do another brief test, and this is to see how your memory works during a period of learning. So I'm going to read a list of words, and I want you to try to remember them in order. It's going to be a long list. You won't be able to remember all of them, so simply try to remember as many of them as you possibly can. Don't write down, just use your head. Room, the, thought, of, and, work, there, the, best, Muhammad Ali, of, well, method, this, and, fur, does, of, and, trap, the, even, face. Now I imagine that the words that you have remembered from that list are probably the following. You'll have remembered more from the beginning, a little bit more from the words at the end. There'll have been a big uncomfortable sag in the middle, and you'll have remembered those words that were repeated. The, and, of. You will also tended to have remembered the one word or phrase which was outstanding. What was it? Right, Muhammad Ali. Now what this little graph shows is that our memory and our understanding really don't work in exactly the same way. You probably understood all of the words, but certainly didn't remember them all. Now, what we have to do is to make sure that when we want to learn, when we want to study, to read any technical papers or whatever, that the memory and the understanding are working in best harmony. And in order to do this, you have to break your study period down into smaller sections. Imagine this as a 2-hour period. You would break it down into 4 half-hour periods with a little break in between. These periods give us a much greater recall during the learning period. Memory and recall and understanding are in perfect harmony. And they also give us a break, which means that in each little period, we're going to be more relaxed, more comfortable, so that as the learning period progresses, our recall is maintained exceptionally highly. This then is recall during a learning period. What happens after the learning period? This is a graph of representations of people saying how they felt that their own memories worked after the learning period. Some people feel that it goes straight in one ear, right out the other. In other words, that they forget almost immediately. Others feel that they have variations, slopes going down, and others that they maintain for a little while and then more gradually slope off. Fortunately, none of these are correct. What actually happens is that at the point that we stop learning, our recall begins to rise. So if we had a half-an-hour learning period, within about 5 minutes, our recall would rise. This is because our mind is integrating all the information we've taken in, putting it together, so that after that 5 minutes, when it's totally organized, our recall is the highest. It's only after this that it begins to drop. And the drop is unfortunately a fairly major one. We lose 80% of the information within 1 day of our learning. How do we prevent this really dramatic decline? Now, fortunately, the graph shows us how. If at this high point you review for a few minutes what you studied in the half-hour period, the decline is halted, and your recall remains high for at least a day. If after 24 hours you review again for only a couple of minutes, the recall will last up to a week. And if again you review after a week, it will last for a month. And after a month review, it will tend to go on for almost ever. Now, what do I mean by review? What I mean is that we take a blank piece of paper, jot down everything you can possibly remember from the learning period, and then compare it with either your original notes or the notes that you made on subsequent reviews. Now you take the notes, compare and contrast, fill in whatever needs to be filled in, correct your errors, and keep that set of notes which is best for your continuing review. After a few of these reviews, you will find that in fact your memory is long-term memory. It will be the same kind as you have for remembering your own name, your own address. So fortunately, the more information you have up here, the more you can grab and link in to new information. The more you know, the more you are able to know. Now, how does this affect us as we grow older? We start off as a bundle of open-ended opportunities. As a young child, our ability continues to improve. Through teenagehood, we get better and better. Between the ages of 18 and 25, we reach the peak. From that point on, society tells us that it's unfortunately all downhill. As a matter of fact, some of us at this time proudly proclaim that our memories are getting worse. We can't remember dates, names, faces, that we're just not as sharp as we used to be. Society also at this time prepares us, as we approach 60 and 65, to retire. It's assumed that we can no longer really function mentally well. Now, this graph shows us our mental abilities as we grow and then grow older. It shows that everything declines: memory, verbal ability, mathematical ability. Fortunately, it's not an accurate graph. We can, in fact, reverse the processes. By reviewing, by constantly exercising our minds, by being creative, we can once again reach that peak. And at any stage in our life, we can pull the whole thing up and continue to improve for as long as we live. Now, we know that memory works three major ways. Firstly, it works in short bursts. Secondly, that if we review, it can be maintained. And thirdly, that as we get older, it does not have to get worse, it can improve. But what about the actual mechanism of memory itself? Memory works by linking, by associations. So that if I say to you the word music, this will bring to your mind all kinds of memories, all kinds of associations. Memories are made of this. Now, the Greeks knew about these associations, and they worked out a series of little mnemonic systems, as they called them, for remembering all kinds of different things. They're the same kind of systems that the stage magicians use, that the mental wizards use. And I'm now going to teach you one of those little systems. It's called the number rhyme system, and in this system, you take the numbers from 1 to 10, and next to each number, you place a rhyming link keyword. The rhyme, obviously, is similar to the sound of the number, so you have, for example, 1 gun, 2 shoe, and so on. Now, next to your numbers and your rhyming words, you place the words that you are asked to remember, and you form linked images between the rhyming words and those words you have to remember. These linked images must be imaginative, perhaps humorous, certainly absurd, definitely exaggerated. They must enable you, in other words, to clearly get a picture in your mind of the link that you're forming, so that you can, of course, remember. Now let's try a few of those. Say we have the number 4, and we're asked to remember the word shell. What's the rhyming word for 4? The answer, door. Now here you have to make an image which you can remember. So you combine door and shell. Try imagining, for example, that your bedroom door is not a bedroom door, but a massive shell. And that as you walk into your bedroom, you are walking through a major shell. Now make sure that that image is clearly seen on your inner eye. Next, the number 7, rhyming word heaven, and you're asked to remember lever. You might here imagine yourself with a gigantic lever desperately trying to break into the doors of heaven. Now make sure that that image is very clear in your mind. Next, the number 2, rhyming word shoe. You have to remember the word plane. This is an aeroplane, so imagine your shoe with 2 enormous wings so that you make your shoe into a flying one. And again, try to hold that clearly in your inner eye. Number 9, the rhyming word is vine. The word you have to remember, train. Perhaps you could try hanging trains off the vine itself instead of grapes. So you have a large vine with trains hanging off it as fruit. Number 8, gate. Here you have to remember the word matchsticks. Imagine that that whole gate is actually made of gigantic matchsticks and that they're on fire. Number 3, rhyming word tree. The word you have to remember, leaf. This is a dangerous one because it's almost too sensible. So what you have to do is to make it absurd. You take tree, strip it of all the leaves, and put one gigantic leaf on the top. Next, number 1, rhyming word gun. Word you have to remember, tar. Imagine that gun turning around and spraying masses of tar from out of the television all over your living room. Next, number 6, sticks. The word you have to remember, moon. Here you might try imagining the astronauts trying to land on the moon and being completely prevented by all those sticks sticking up and getting in the way of their landing craft. Number 5, rhyming word hive. The word you have to remember, hair. You could perhaps here try remembering a gigantic beehive hairstyle with lots of bees coming out of it and bothering the person underneath the hairstyle. And then finally, number 10, hen. The word you have to remember is field. Now again, this could be almost too sensible, so make it absurd. Have a tiny, tiny field in which you have placed an absolutely enormous hen. Now I want to test you on those. So again, take your pencils and try to write down the rhyming word and the number that I gave you and the word that I asked you to remember with the number and the rhyming word. So I'm going to give you the numbers, you then write down the rhyming word and the word that we connected as an image. First then, number 2, the rhyming word and the image we connected with it. Next, number 7. The rhyme should be comparatively easy for you to pick out, and if you're having difficulty, check quickly through the alphabet and then put the word that we connected as an image with it. Number 10, put down the rhyming word and the image connected. Next, number 8, rhyming word and the other word. Number 6, if you have any difficulty with one, don't stay on it, go on to the others, you can always go back a little bit later. Number 5, the rhyming word and the word with it. Number 3, number 1, number 4, once again, first the rhyming word and then the image that we connected. And finally, number 9. Now that you've completed those, check your own answers. When you're checking these, give yourself 1 mark for the rhyming word, 1 mark for the word that you connected with it. So you'll mark yourself out of a total of 20. Well, how did you do? I imagine that you probably did a lot better than you did in the first test. Well, the reason for this is that in the first one you had no system at all, which your mind was groping around for those lost words and was almost literally in a mental void, a mental vacuum. In the last one, you had a system which was related to the way your mind works. You were able to link things together. Now, so far, you've only had one small system, but there are a large number of others, and these others enable you to remember things like lists of up to 100 and sometimes even up to 1,000. They enable you to remember names and faces. They also enable you to remember dates, shopping lists, telephone numbers, almost anything that you want to remember. These systems are outlined in various books, and it's certainly well worth learning them and learning how to improve your memory. The point about the systems is that it isn't actually they that enable you to do the remembering, it's your mind itself. The systems reflect part of the mechanism of your mind. It's your mind that does it, especially when you let it know how. Last time I talked about the way words can be used as hooks for grappling on to other associations. I also explained how they could be used for two main purposes, for recall and for creative uses. Now, I call these keywords. Throughout the series, we've been suggesting the connective nature of words. You probably recall this one. So you see how music, like all other words, has those millions of little grappling hooks. Now, today I want to take this one step further and to show you how these grappling hooks connect to each other on patterns in your mind. But first, how do we transmit and receive information? Well, one natural way is by speaking. Here I am speaking to you. I am speaking one word at a time. You are receiving one word at a time. Similarly, in written form. The symbols appear in lines and are read one word or one group at a time. In television, we have both. Now, because of this linear dependence that we have, it's been assumed that our minds are also linear. Look, for example, at the way we list things. Look at how often lists occur in our everyday lives. Bills, instructions of all kinds. So the case for our minds being linear and list-like looks pretty convincing. But fortunately, the so-called evidence is wrong. Let's have a look again at the argument about speaking. Now, granted, I am speaking one word at a time, and you are receiving one word at a time. But that's only the physical part. What about the actual process that goes on in the mind? Now, as I'm speaking, I'm not simply drawing words out one at a time from my mind. I'm considering all the possibilities of words that there might be, and then selecting those which I hope at the moment will be most important. And as all that process is going on, I'm also seeing the things in front of me, the camera, also aware of you, of myself trying to speak to you to communicate. So I'm picking from a whole range of words the ones which seem appropriate at the time. In addition to that, I'm keeping things like my breath rhythm going, my heartbeat, and in fact, the whole of my mind is holding in fairly delicate balance all the chemicals inside it. So it isn't a linear or list-like process. Speaking is choosing from a totally delicate, interwoven, interlaced network of ideas. Now, similarly with you, when you are listening to what I am speaking to you, you are criticizing, analyzing, understanding, watching, perhaps even thinking about something else. The same thing applies to print. When we are reading the lines, our mind is busy making associations, building images, going through exactly the same intricate processes as for speaking. So our minds don't work in patterns, don't work in lines. Make sure you remember that. Don't work in lines, they work in patterns. And I'm going to now give an example of how we can use this. Now let's imagine that I am particularly interested in Rasputin. Rasputin, the notorious Russian monk who dealt with the aristocracy in Russia just before the Russian Revolution. And I'm reading a book about Rasputin and want to make notes on the subject. Now, what I'm going to do is to make notes in pattern form, not in the normal list-like form, but pattern notes. So I start where the pattern, where the idea would start, in the center. In the center of my notes, I put Rasputin. I do not put a list with Rasputin at the top, because he is not the top of the list, he is the center of the idea. Now, around the idea of Rasputin, there are four major themes. The first of these is nationalism. So we print clearly the word nationalism on a line, associating it to the center idea. Next was his involvement in politics. So again, on a line, we print clearly the word politics. The third of these four main items was his involvement in religion. So again, we print, and again, connected to the center, the word religion. And finally, rounding off the big four, was his almost legendary involvement in sex. Now here, to begin with, we have the center, the core of the pattern, the core of the idea, and the four main sub-branches. But obviously this isn't where the whole thing ends. There are other ideas attached to these more major, more central ideas. And so we simply build up the pattern by adding other ideas to the ones we've already got. And we add in the same way, connecting with lines, printing clearly on. So let's have a look at nationalism. We know that he was very involved with his country, which was Russia. So we add here Russia. Coming down to politics, we know that he was involved with the rulers of the country at the time. So we have Nicholas and Alexandra. His involvement with religion was perhaps one of the main features of him, and we know here that he was a mystic, that he claimed to have extraordinary powers, and here we can branch off this sub-branch that he claimed to be and was an exceptional hypnotist, and he was also a healer. Now, when it came to sex, he was voracious, and so we might here simply note the numerous mistresses that Rasputin had. Now, even now, the pattern is obviously not complete. There are more ideas that can be added to it. And so just to give you an idea of how the pattern would be built up without actually going into all the detail, you would find that from the nationalism branch here, there would obviously be other major branches coming off Russia, and branches coming off the sub-branches. In politics, you would have the various problems, etc., with Nicholas and Alexandra. There would obviously be other major sections of politics. On religion, one would be concerned with his development in religion, the different kinds of sects to which he belonged, and so one would have sub-branches of this. And on sex, each one of the involvements had other ramifications, and so one could add to those. Now, even here, the pattern isn't completely finished. We can link aspects of the pattern to itself. We're not restricted, as one normally is, and can join parts to connect with each other. So that, for example, we have sex and his mistresses. Now, it was assumed that he had some kind of sexual involvement with Alexandra. So if this is her in the group here, we have an arrow which links him from this part to this part. Now, again, we know that he was a healer, and this is how he became involved with the Russian rulers. He, in fact, was claiming to be able to heal Alexandra's hemophiliac son. So we link the pattern from healing to Alexandra and where her son might have been. Now, looking at this pattern, we can see that it actually is a reflection of the mind's images, the images that the mind actually has inside it. The mind is far happier working like this than it is with lines and lists. So let's see how we can apply patterns for, say, note-taking. Now, what I'm going to do is to talk about the first three programs. Remember, those were on the eye, on memory, and words. Now, standard notes would look like this. There are a lot of wasted words here. So let's start again with 2 sheets of blank paper, no lines. Now take the left-hand page, add 3 centers. Each one is one of the 3 main areas we discussed: the eye, memory, and words. Now I'm going to start with the eye. One of the most important things we discussed in that program was the idea of perception. So we add perception. We write it on top of this line, in capitals because they are clearer when you come to look at this again. Now, 2 other important ideas from this program were the idea of the definition of reading and visual aids. Add these, obviously, also to the center. Now, we actually defined reading. The definition in this case was important, so we note it with a code 1. And it's here that the second page of notes comes into use. At this stage, we code 1 on the right-hand page and write the definition because it's important that we have those words. We then connect it by the coded 1 to the left-hand page so that we can see how the pattern and the non-pattern information connect together. Now, I want to continue in some detail with more of this pattern note-taking because the patterns are one of the most important parts of this whole series. So we're going to continue with the other 2 programs. Perception can be developed by adding color, shape, size, and texture. And you'll also remember that reading involved symbols. You can develop that one for yourself. The reading process started with 4 stages: recognition, registration, comprehension, integration. Now we can complete the beginning of that pattern by expanding the section on aids. And we note there that at that particular section, we were concerned with the way that the eyes move, how they actually grouped words when they were reading, how you could actually handle the whole process better by using a visual guide. Now, so far then, our 2 pages of notes will look like this. Okay, I'm going to now move on to the other 2 sections, memory and words. Starting with memory, you'll recall that recall was one of the most important words, and that during a learning period, you recall first and last things better, and those items which are repeated or associated. Now, in the memory program, we summarize this with 2 graphs. So again here, you link the number 2 on the right-hand page with the pattern on the left-hand page. The 2 graphs here concern, firstly, the fact that we remember more at the beginning, more at the end, more of things which are repeated or associated, more of the things which are outstanding. And the second graph shows how your understanding and recall work in better harmony when you have small study periods, 20 to 40 minutes, with breaks in between. Now, we also talked about understanding and recall in conjunction with review. And once again, we use graphs here. The graphs, again, we code with the number 3 so that they fit or connect to the pattern. The first of these graphs shows that we recall a little bit more afterwards and then have that rapid decline, tripping over a word hook there. And the second graph shows that the rise in recall and understanding and knowledge can be maintained as long as you review properly. So memories are made of this. Now you should be able to complete the pattern on words fairly easily. Standard word usage meant wastage of about 90%. I said that words were symbols and that they relied on hooks. And the word symbols were divided into 2 parts, the creative and the recall. And we talked of the trigger effect on keywords. Now this then is going to be our whole approach to note-taking in the future. Let's look at the complete set of notes before moving on. You can see that looking at these, the whole pattern of the information is clear, that the linear information is easily recognized and linked with the patterned form. Now that's all right, you might say, but yours were prepared and neat. If I did the same kind of thing, mine would be messy and disorganized, so the pattern method might be no good. Well, let's have a look then at what we mean by the word messy. Let's assume that you're in a situation in which the lecturer is particularly bad. And so you're writing notes in pattern form, and he comes up with various points, which he then disconnects, and you find that that doesn't really connect with there, so you have to cross it out, and you also have to cross out this bit here. He carries on, and you find that there are question marks here, that you don't agree with what he says here, that you're adding bits down here which you later realize don't connect there, so you have to circle those and put an arrow over here, that those 4 were not perhaps complete, and so you have to add more and cross out one of them, and that you end up with what you might really consider a mess. Now we've got to look then at what we mean by that word, a mess. Messy, like all other words, has many hooks. And 2 of the most important ones are messy to look at and messy as far as the information is concerned. Now let's look then at this messy bunch and imagine that, if you like, as even more messy than this. The question is it messy to look at, and is it messy for getting information from? Now you will find that as far as getting information from it is concerned, it's quite neat. Even though it looks messy, you can immediately tell by looking at this kind of page of notes where the questions arose during the lecture, where isolated little groups exist, where connections had to take place, where disagreements took place with the lecturer, where things had to be added and subtracted. So you find that although it looks messy, it isn't messy as far as the information is concerned. Now let's look at standard notes. We find that here they are, all very neat and nice to look at. But where is the information? Nowhere in here does it say where the questions were. Nowhere does it explain how the note taker disagreed or agreed with the actual lecturer. Nowhere does it show how these things connect with each other. Looking at this, it's just a bunch of very similar looking print that doesn't give you any immediate information. So it turns out then that as far as information is concerned, and that's what we're concerned about when we're taking notes, even a messy looking pattern is better than neat looking linear notes. But fortunately, even this messiness can be overcome. And we overcome it by relating to the memory program and the review graph. You recall that just after learning period, your memory rises, and at that point, you have to do your first review. Now you do that by copying out the messy pattern into a neat final form. Your next review simply takes the form of a blank page of notes on which you jot down whatever you can recall, compare with your originals, check, correct, and then move on to your next review, in which case you take another blank page, jot down what you can recall, and compare it again with your recall notes, making whatever corrections are necessary. So the patterns and the review fit in perfectly. You can recall more from your patterns anyway than you're reviewing. Now, what other uses can we put these patterns to? Well, so far I've mentioned notes, and you also know that they can be used at the beginnings and ends of television programs for the credits. But there are other uses. You can use them for problem solving, for creative thinking, for essay and speech preparation, for any thought organization. You can use them for diaries. I mentioned last week that you might try keeping a little diary of key words. Try this week keeping a diary in pattern form. Now, there are many other uses. During the week, try and come up with them and practice with them. Now, I've mentioned that the patterns are in fact reflections of your mind. But what we've got so far certainly isn't a total reflection. Remember that there are colors in here and dimensions. And next week, we're going to be investigating some of those other dimensions. Psychological textbooks were saying that the mind and the eye that went with it were similar to the workings of a camera. Camera is a fairly simple object. Light goes in through the lens, and the image is then received on the photographic plate. The lens being the eye, the photographic light-sensitive plate, the mind. So I direct this at an object. Light from the object comes towards the camera, goes through the lens and onto the photographic plate when I press the shutter. This is now a permanent record, and if we want to look around the object, we must keep pressing the button. Making such a record can be a rather tedious process, and it doesn't really describe how our minds work. Our minds, in fact, record multi-dimensional image, and they can look around these. They don't have to resort to a series of two-dimensional linear photographs. Let's look again, then, at the photographic process. If I want further information about this, I would have to take off the top and rephotograph. Now, our minds can imagine the outside and the inside and all around. If I want to look around this photograph, I just can't do it. And if we have holes in the plate, we get holes in the image. If you cover half your plate, you lose half your image. If you shatter a photographic plate, the image is destroyed. So we've discovered then that cameras are inadequate, totally inadequate, as a description of the way that our minds work. And this is even though they're a fairly recent technological development within the last 150 years, in fact. So the question then is there anything in our modern technology that can give us a better comparison for what goes on inside our heads? The answer is fortunately yes. Within the last 25 years, we've developed what is known as holography. This is a three-dimensional form of photography, and we have here a simple illustration to explain it. A laser beam is split into two. One half of the beam travels towards the object to be photographed. The beam sprays off it, and some of the rays go towards the photographic plate. The other half of the beam is reflected so that it approaches the photographic plate at a different angle. Now, where this part of the beam and this beam meet at the plate, they interfere with each other so that the waves, the high waves and low waves of the light, interrupt. And we get what is known as an interference pattern. Now, that interference pattern is recorded on the plate. And if you take away the plate, it has that interference pattern on it. You can't see it, but it's actually there. If you then take away this part of the beam and the object and put the plate back, this reference beam reproduces out here the original object so that it actually looks like the original. It's a three-dimensional ghost image. So let's have a brief entry into the world of holography. This is a three-dimensional image of the brain. When I take away the solid object, the ghost still remains. Now, the three-dimensional ghost there can actually be probed. You can put your finger through it. It's completely in space behind this holographic plate. Another extraordinary feature of these is that if I take out the plate on which the image is contained, I can look through it, you see nothing on it, but the image is in fact contained within this plate in billions and billions and billions of tiny image centers. We can also, in this three-dimensional holography, get perspective, so that if we move, we can actually see around the three-dimensional photograph that we've taken. Now, another extraordinary feature of the hologram is that if we cover up roughly half of the plate, we can actually look around the side of it and still see, or in fact uncover, the images behind. Very similar to looking through a window with a curtain which has been half drawn. Now, there are a number of other extraordinary qualities about these lasers. The image that they project is a three-dimensional ghost. It's absolutely real. You can walk around it, and if you walk around to the back, you see the back. If you look at it from above, you see from above. So they're using these, obviously, in a number of ways. For example, in theater, the Hamlet scenes where you have a ghost actually becomes a holographic ghost. You can put your hand through it, probe around. It really has all the standard qualities that ghosts are supposed to have. You can get your Cheshire cat smiling at you with no body with a hologram. Now, another thing about these is that if you take your plate and shatter it, and then pick up any one of the particles of that plate, that particle, whichever one it happens to be, will still contain the image, so that each part of the holographic plate contains enough information to reproduce the entire original image. So let's have a look at that by first taking this plate, which has got a holograph of atoms on it, and then we're going to shatter it. Now, if I take one of these pieces and get it at the right angle, it will in fact reproduce that original image. And if we were able to move around more with this particular piece, we would see the whole atom. Now, this is very, very similar to the way that your brain works. Each cell contains whole structures of patterns which are duplicated in other cells. I said that holography was much nearer the truth, but really it's not even the half of it. Your brain is infinitely more complex, more multidimensional, more advanced, more refined. Just think of a familiar object and the myriad ways your mind can play with it.
If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today, you better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was will gather there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic.
that was some picnic, but now let's get down to some real work. What I want to do is to instill a bit of imagination into those two-dimensional black and white patterns we saw at the beginning. So if we look at the bottom center, words, we could replace it by a hook symbol. And we could add a bit of depth to memory. So our centers now make a more immediate impact. And instead of the word I, we could do a little sketch. You should remember from the I program that we defined reading as the way you interacted with symbols. The first 4 stages were recognition, registration, comprehension, and integration. Another aspect was perception. Remember we said look for color, shape, size, texture, so we can make the lettering reflect these ideas. Now, the basic idea is becoming clear now, and our 2-page notes are taking form. Remember, the right-hand side is for your linear information and graphs. Now, we've seen up to this point that the mind is far more holographic, dimensional than we have previously thought. And we know that these patterns have to be in some form a reflection of our mind's internal patterning. So we need some kind of method for taking this more or less off the page. And there are a number of ways of doing this. Firstly, we can use arrows. The arrows connect parts of the pattern which can't be connected on a normal page. Here, for example, we have shape and we've got symbols. So we have an arrow which connects those 2 parts of the pattern. Now, the arrow, of course, doesn't simply have to be single-headed. We can add other arrows so that the head can become multiply pronged. And also, an arrow isn't always one directional. It can have 2 directions. The information can more or less swing back and forward between itself. So we add here another arrowhead. Now, in addition to arrows, in order to make these things more dimensional, to show that the links are not just on the page, but in a sense, to use shapes. Now, I'm not going to build up lots of information on here, but just to show you the kind of shapes that can be used. You might have other sections, and you can use, for example, rectangles to signify certain kinds of ideas. You can have triangles, circles, spheres, all kinds of shapes to show you how the pattern in your mind is in fact thinking in those forms. And of course, in addition to simply this kind of shape, you can make it actually stand off the page by making it more dimensional. So instead of having just a square, you can take your square and make it into a cube and print whatever words you wish to print on the cube where they should actually fit. All of this, as you can see, is making the thing more dimensional, showing that the interrelationships are not just flat on the page, but off it. Now, in addition to these, there are more methods. You can use codes. You might think that a particular idea you have on your pattern is a very good one. So you put an exclamation mark. That could also mean perhaps importance. There could be something that you consider to be particularly correct or accurate. So you might put a check mark. In addition to this, you can add things like asterisks for points that you consider to be important. If you're taking notes from a lecture, you might find that you want to question certain of the things that have been said, so you code with a question mark. So this pattern begins to build up the kind of structural information pattern that actually is in your mind. Now, in addition to that, you can see that we've already used a further method, and that is color. But color can be used even more widely than what we've done here. You might decide that a given part of a pattern here coincides or relates in some way to an idea you have down here. So you color code. The minute you look at that pattern, you see that those two colors immediately relate the information, associate the ideas. Now you can use color in addition to map out certain idea areas within the pattern. So you could perhaps circle this branch of the idea here. With a color which shows you the shape and overall construct of that particular section of the pattern. Now one could go on building up this kind of pattern forever. But what you see there is an idea that is coming off the page, becoming almost a vibrant, dimensional, colored, structured, shaped projection of the kind of thing that actually goes on in your mind. Now, knowing all this about it now will make you more able to jot down some ideas for the application to which these kind of patterns can be put. So if you'd just like to take a piece of paper and jot down a few ideas. Now, did you make a list, or did you make a pattern on the use of patterns? And here are some others that other people have prepared. Here, for example, is a pattern by a man analyzing his business and his education. Here's a pattern of self-analysis. The next two are by people who've been following courses similar to this series. You'll probably recognize some of the words. And here's a marvelous example of 3-dimension. And this one is by my producer, who nearly lost her job immediately after having done it. Now, I've talked about the 3-dimensional nature of these patterns and the various ways in which they can be used for creative thinking, for note-taking, for problem-solving, for meetings, for recording diaries. In fact, for anything that is concerned with words, images, and the way that your mind interrelates them. But there are two other major advantages. And I want to imagine here that you're building up a pattern of your own information on a subject which is of particular interest to you. Now, as you read, study, learn from newspapers and so on, imagine that you're building up this pattern. And I'll just represent, so we get some idea of the extent to which this pattern will go. You'll be adding the other words for the definition. You'll be talking about visual aids and so on. But the pattern, in the end, becomes gigantic. At this particular stage, in other words, when you've received information from various sources and noted it down on a growing organic pattern, not just a piece of note that you put down, forget, and then just leave, a growing pattern. What happens at this stage is that suddenly the other disciplines begin to impose themselves or interrelate into yours. In other words, the boundaries of your pattern of information begin to coincide with the boundaries of information from other disciplines. Now, we could take an example here. When you're talking about the eye, you might start to project up about light and how that enters your eye, which very soon gets you into things like physics and philosophy, and obviously the psychology of perception. So at this stage, your pattern is becoming an environmentally enclosed one. information isn't isolated, it's totally interlinked with all the other information that's around it. So the understanding of your subject becomes greater because you're understanding its interrelationship with the other subjects. Now also, as this kind of pattern builds up, as you receive the information from lectures and books, you find that you can more readily identify areas which have gaps in them, mistakes, and also, and this is particularly important, those areas where the experts are disagreeing. Now, those areas are usually on the periphery of your subject, but rather than, as happens in many cases, understanding the positions from a linear point of view, you can understand this kind of position in the context of all the other information, which means at that stage you are able to make a significant, meaningful, and perhaps helpful contribution to the discussion, disagreement, and argumentation that's going on over that part of the subject. So you see that as the pattern grows, this organic whole, which is a reflection of your own mind, everything within it becomes more totally integrated, and note-taking actually changes. It's no longer a static recording process. It is the organic whole from which you base certain of your statements. It becomes, in other words, a foundation for creativity, for organization, and for integration. So pattern making really does free your mind. Now, in the previous programs, I've asked you to send in questions about anything that you want further information on. So perhaps this time you'd like to send in questions in pattern form. I'd like to see those. And now, here's a man who really knows how to get it together.
Mr. Linear Man and Mr. Pattern Man eagerly await the delivery of 2 kits from Constructor Shed Limited. Mr. Linear Man studies his instructions carefully, line by line. Meanwhile, Mr. Pattern Man keywords his instructions and begins to build up a fantastic pattern. Mr. Linear Man can't believe his eyes. Mr. Pattern Man already has that B7 in place. Sometime later, Mr. Pattern Man puts the final touch to his super constructor shed. Uh-oh, just look at that mess. Har, har, har.
If you were in command of a little task force dropping into unknown and very dangerous territory, and you lost your intelligence officer and all the plans, what would you do? after a quick cup of tea, you'd obviously send out reconnaissance scouts to find out where the hell you were. And I'm sure that given a similar situation, you do the same. When it comes to an unfamiliar study situation, most of us barge straight in. First line of instructions, page 1 of a study book. Now you remember that in last week's program, I talked about preparation and organization. And this time I want to talk about the application to a study learning period. Now I divide this into 4 main areas: overview, preview, in-view, and review. I'm going to deal with these in order, so we'll take overview first. The overview is very similar to sending out your reconnaissance scouts. They spy out the information and prevent you from bashing your head into mountains of unfamiliar vocabulary or from leading all your troops into a swamp of bad writing. The overview is really very similar to getting a general outline of the information that you're going to be dealing with. So that means dealing with the table of contents, with graphs, photographs, illustrations, any graphic material. Also in the overview, it's very important that you pay special attention to results, summaries, and conclusions. They summarize for you the information that you're going to be dealing with. So overview then is the overall outline. Now that's followed by your preview. Preview is very similar to the overview, but it doesn't deal with the graphics, it deals with the printed text information. In a preview, you're concerned with the beginnings and ends of sections, beginnings and ends of paragraphs. That's where most of the information usually is. The middle information you can get by skimming down with your visual guide to get the general flow of the information from this preview. Preview, of course, is going to be followed by an in-view. Now, the in-view is where you try to get all the information filled in. You're completing the pattern of your information. And it's very important at this stage not to spend too much time on those areas which are difficult to grasp. Come back to them later in the review. The review is your final stage, and it's here that you actually begin to make your pattern notes. The notes, of course, you make here and not earlier, because if you made them earlier, you wouldn't really have got all the information, so couldn't have made proper notes. Your final notes then will summarize all your information. Now, that at the moment is the pattern for application, and I'm going to apply it to a particular situation. Our study is going to be on the history of the location of the mind. Now, obviously, for such a study, I'd be using a large number of books, but here I'm just going to use one. And before actually getting down to the preparation section, which we talked about last week, we'd have to overview the entire book. In order to do that, first, obviously, we get to the table of contents, and using a visual guide, cover the whole section in order to find out basically what the outline of the book is. From there, we'd probably go back to the index, have a general peruse of the index to find out the names of the relevant people, the kind of vocabulary and concepts that were going to be used. And then we might go to the review or summary if the book had one. And in this case, they do. It's called an envoy. And at this stage, we'd quickly go over that again to find out what the general structure of the book was. And in addition to this, you would flip through the entire book to find out what the general lay of the land was. And obviously you wouldn't do it as fast as I'm doing here. You take a reasonably leisurely trip through the book, finding out all about it. Now, just to emphasize the importance of this particular stage, the psychology student I once had read 400 pages of his psychology text, and he'd spent 3 months, roughly an hour a day, bashing his way through it. He was beginning to forget, at his 400th page stage, what had happened in the beginning. I asked him if he knew what the last chapter was, and he hadn't the faintest idea. And it turned out that that chapter was, in fact, review, summary, and conclusions. And he decided that if he had, in fact, read that first to get an idea of what the book was about, he'd have saved about 90% of his time. So that first general overview is very important. Now, it's that overview that enables you to make a decision as to your time and amount for a particular study session. And as I mentioned before, you mark this off with markers at the beginning and at the end. You then, of course, note down what knowledge you have on the subject and also questions that you want answered by the section that you're studying in that subject. Now, having done that, you're ready to apply yourself to the section that you're going to study. And you start off, of course, by overviewing that section. So in the overview, you check the title of the chapter, move on and cover the diagrams and illustrations. Cover them reasonably carefully. You want the information from them. Also look at photographs and illustrations. And you complete that through the chapter. Now, when you've finished that section, the overview, you go back to the beginning and start your preview. A preview is where you go through the print on the, first of all, concentrating rather, on the beginning paragraphs and on the first sentence in each paragraph, skimming down with your visual aid to get the flow, getting the last sentence, the first sentence, skimming down, and so on. So that in the overview and the preview, you're getting the general outline of that information, firstly from the graphs and illustrations, and secondly from the print itself. Now, next we come to the in-view, and here I'm going to use a little bit of film that we used earlier as an illustration. Now, in Western civilization, little has been known about the location of the mind before the time of the Greeks. And even the Greeks were comparatively ignorant. The philosopher Parmenides, for example, considered thought processes to be a function of light and dark, and heat and cold. Herophilus assumed that they were in spirit form, and many other great Greek philosophers, including Plato, assumed that they were either spirits or functions of different fluids. Even the first Western scientist, Aristotle, attributed most of the qualities we now attribute to the brain to the heart. After the Greeks, religious dogma took the place of scientific inquiry, and little progress was made. It was not until the 16th and 17th centuries, in conjunction with Newton and the scientific revolution, that any real progress was made. It was discovered that the thought processes were located in the brain in the head, and they were associated with complex electrical impulses and chemical interactions. The brain also controls our nervous and muscular systems. Recent research is still trying to locate specific and general functional areas in the brain, but we still know very little. Most of the work is still to be done. So the in-view is where we begin to fill in the information which has not been filled in the first two stages. Now, it's very important at this point not to waste time on those areas which give you particular difficulty. You simply make a note of them and pass on. Well, the reason for passing on is that if you do pass on, you're going to get information from the other side of that difficulty, so that when you return to it, it will be solvable in context of the information around it, and often, therefore, easier to solve. It also gives your mind a chance to mull over that information and perhaps come up with a solution itself. In other words, you allow your mind to work creatively on the problem for a little while. Now, also in the in-view, you prepare to take notes. You don't actually take them because you don't really know all the information yet. You prepare. And you do this by marking in the margin. So, for example, you might mark with a straight line in the margin an area that you thought was worthy of note. You might have a more wriggled or curvy line for an area that was giving you difficulty to which you wish to return. You could have question marks for areas you wanted to question, exclamation marks for things you thought were particularly notable. Now, it's important here not to worry about ruining the book by using a pencil. If your pencil lead is soft enough, and if your eraser is a good one, you'll find that the damage is less than simply by turning the pages with your finger and thumb. So you carry on marking in the margins that information which you think is important. So now we come to the final review stage. Now remember that in the in-view I told you not to get bogged down in particular problems. Leave them, come back to them later. Take the example of building a jigsaw puzzle can be compared to the learning process. When you come to a difficult piece, put it to the side, wait for later, and carry on building up your pattern as you go. Another difficult piece, put it to the side. As the pattern develops and other difficult pieces are discarded, the general form begins to take shape. And those difficult pieces fit in easily. After the structure of information has completed itself, you're prepared at your review stage now to take notes, and I'll use an example here of the study we've been involved with, the location of the mind. We might start by having a dotted line to indicate that long time period when nothing really happened at all. So we put hundreds of thousands of years where basically we didn't know anything about it. Our next section might be the Greeks. Now we can give them a bit of color and dimension. And from there, we would add the important sections in the Greek area. Now we might, for example, have the various famous people, the Greek philosophers. So we'd have Plato. And Plato was in fact famous for his wax tablet hypothesis, which said that the mind was like a wax tablet. Experience was written on it, and time gradually eroded it. So here you just might have a little symbol of Plato's wax tablet. We would then have the other philosophers, which would include Parmenides, Aristotle, and a host of others. Now again, we can give these a bit more coding. For Aristotle, we know that he centered in the heart many of the areas which we now know to be in the brain, so we give him a little heart. And for Parmenides, with his fluids, and the others, for example, with spirits, we could have little impression of a spirit and some indication of fluids. And when we completed this section on the Greeks, we could map that whole area off. Now the Greeks would be followed by the Dark Ages, and here we can again symbolize a black center, the Dark Ages. Now, one of the only rays of light in the Dark Ages was a philosopher called Galen. He was a religious philosopher who basically accepted the ideas of Aristotle, so we can have an arrow. And Galen's ideas were in turn accepted by the church and stated as church dogma. So we have religion. And they were accepted so strongly that little progress was made. So again, we circle off this particular area. Now after that, we come to the 16th, 17th, 18th century, the Renaissance. And here, once again, we have a series of particularly influential characters. Now, perhaps prime among those was Newton. And of course, there were all the others. Now, at this particular stage in history, it was discovered that the mind was concerned with electrical impulses and with chemical interactions. So again, we could have a small symbol for that. Electrical impulses and something for chemical interactions. And again, this area can be circled off, perhaps here in a different color. Now, another point about this was that in this time period, it was finally confirmed that most of the thought processes were located in the brain. So we can have an arrow from this whole section back to our center. Now, our final section will be the modern thought. And here, of a number of ways you could choose, you might decide to branch it off by country or area. So we could have the USSR, United States of America, Europe, and all the other areas. Now from this, we could branch off, again, noting those researchers who were particularly important. And from them, again, we can have arrows going into the center, showing those particular areas of the brain that they're concerned with. And on those arrows, you could print the appropriate information. And once again, this area can be circled. Now, at this stage, you've actually completed your application section of study. Your final notes are made. The information is all there as you wish to have it. And in fact, this looks like a brain pattern itself. But I want now to go back and look at the overall picture of the application section. We've completed it, but during the process, it's important that a number of things continue to be done. Now, the first one of these, of course, is the use of the visual guide. And this is done throughout the process. And I want to explain briefly here why it's so important to use a visual guide. If you wanted to look at this particular graph, your eye does not slide down it. It takes in the information in chunks, 3, and then goes off and looks at the information underneath. So the graph of your eye movement would be down, down, along, and back, which is not the same as the graph that you've been learning about. So your mind has two memories, the memory of the graph as it is, and the memory of your eye movement graph, and they contradict, so your memory will be poor. Now, if you use a visual guide, as follows, the memory of the shape will be right, the memory of your eye movement pattern will be correct, and you'll have two other memories as well, the memory of seeing this thing move over the page, and the memory of your muscles moving. So you have 4 positive memories instead of 1 good and 1 bad. So the visual guide is really essential. And as I mentioned, it's also essential not only in the overview on graphs, but also for regular reading. Now again, throughout this entire process, you should have been using all the information given to you from the previous programs, using the memory techniques, proper notation techniques, general learning, and so on. There's also another particularly important thing that should be going on throughout this, and this is selection and rejection. Now, as you're overviewing, previewing, and imbuing, you're trying to sort out that information that you actually want to keep. Now, there are a number of tips for sifting out information which is in some way suspect. A number of these, for example, if the author is using emotional language, using Christian names and positive words to describe something, that information is, in a sense, suspect, as it would be if he were using negatively emotional words. He's taking you along an emotional path rather than the information. So that information is suspect. Other kinds of suspect information. If an author says, we all know that, everybody knows. Do we all know? If you nip down into the pub, you find that perhaps we don't, or that we do disagree. So these kind of tips, tremendously important for actually selecting and rejecting that information you want to note, that information that you want to disregard. Once you've completed all of that, your initial study application period is over, and you then enter into your long-term learning. And there are two main factors here. The first one, down here after you've done your pattern, is the review graph. Now you recall that after 10 minutes, your learning recall reaches a high point. After that, you lose 80% within a day, so you must maintain it. Now the maintenance of this information can only be done by coordinating your reviews regularly with your pattern notes. So we look at the patterns, and what you have to do here is to review by using the pattern, by checking the information. Now, if you imagine this as your major ongoing pattern, you find that what you do is add to it after each study period. And as I mentioned before, as this pattern expands, it begins to touch on all those other areas surrounding your information, which means that you finally become able to criticize, to integrate, to understand where you need more study. What happens then is that as you read more books, you have more information, you can ask better questions, establish your goals, know more, learn more. And in the final analysis then, all your learning, all your studying, instead of being a boring, dull, oppressive process, actually becomes really, really enjoyable.
Your head.
If you were in command of a little task force dropping into unknown and very dangerous territory, and you lost your intelligence officer and all the plans, what would you do? After a quick cup of tea, you'd obviously send out reconnaissance scouts to find out where the hell you were. The army might train its men to cope with lost plans, but most of us don't even have plans to lose. We do all have problems, we do all have decisions to make, and we do all need to know how to use our heads. In this series, I've tried to introduce you to new ways of using your eyes, your memory, creative ability, and organizational capacity. I've tried to help you use your head. In this last program, I will be keywording, so to speak, the most important parts of each program, showing how each connects with all the others. In other words, you will be building up one continuous, ongoing pattern as I review. You will recall that we compared the number of interconnections in the telephone system with the number of interconnections in your brain. We have more interconnections in each of our brains than exist in all the telephone exchanges of the world. That's the potential, but where's the evidence? The problem is that we've never devised the proper operating manual. Think, for example, of your formal education and ask yourselves the following questions. In school, were you taught how your eyes can scan print, getting all kinds of different information from it? Were you told about the different speed your eyes can travel? Were you taught about the nature of your memory? Why it forgets things? How it records things? How it can record things better? Were you taught special study techniques which would enable you to relate, not just to your own subject, but to any subject with confidence? Were you taught the nature of problem solving? Were you taught to think creatively? Were you taught to think? I'm pretty sure the answer to nearly all those questions is no. Let's look first then at the eye and the information it scans. Reading is the way you interact with symbols, and those symbols are not always words. What that really means is that reading includes the way in which you absorb, understand, and remember the information that comes to you in books, in pictures, on television, in newspapers, in diagrams, in graphs, and so on. We can break this reading process down into a number of steps. First is the ability to recognize, to know what the symbols are. If you don't, then you can't interact with them. Most of you watching this program will know the English alphabet and English words. Even if you know the words, but don't know how to look at them properly, you'll find difficulty in reading. You can instantly improve your performance by fixing your eyes on larger groups of words. And the whole process can be speeded up by using a visual guide. So properly directed eye movement and visual efficiency are important to the reading process, which, let me recap, involves recognition, assimilation, comprehension, and we must be able to retain and recall what we've read, an ability which varies with age. We start off as a bundle of open-ended opportunities. As a young child, our ability continues to improve. Through teenagehood, we get better and better. Between the ages of 18 and 25, we reach the peak. From that point on, society tells us that it's unfortunately all downhill. As a matter of fact, some of us at this time proudly proclaim that our memories are getting worse. We can't remember dates, names, faces, but we're just not as sharp as we used to be. Society also at this time prepares us, as we approach 60 and 65, to retire. It's assumed that we can no longer really function mentally well. Now this graph shows us our mental abilities as we grow and then grow older. It shows that everything declines: memory, verbal ability, mathematical ability. Fortunately, it's not an accurate graph. We can, in fact, reverse the processes. By reviewing, by constantly exercising our minds, by being creative, we can once again reach that peak. And at any stage in our life, we can pull the whole thing up and continue to improve for as long as we live. So there's hope for us all. The eye and the memory are not the only factors, though, which are important in reading and learning. It's essential also to understand and to integrate the information. A large part of the information comes to us in words, and words are like those little plant burrs that you find stuck to your clothes in summer. They have hundreds of little hooks attached to them, each hook representing a different association, interpretation, or meaning. Each person, then, will have different associations attached to his hooks. And basically this is why misunderstandings often occur. How often when you say something with the best of intentions, do you find that it's taken the wrong way? That's because you have certain hooks attached to the words that you're sending out, while the person receiving them may in fact have quite different ones. Now, all words carry these associative hooks, but I want here to talk about two main kinds of words: creative words and recall words. Creative words have no special meaning, but give us all kinds of possibilities for interpretation. For example, horror, beauty, ooze, bizarre. You see these creative words in literature, in poetry, in advertising, in newspaper placards. The second are key recall words. A recall word funnels into it a large amount of very specific information. When this word is triggered, we get exactly the same kind of information out as we put in. Usually we see words in lines and lists, but the words in our minds are linked not in lists and lines, but in pattern structures. Up to now, I've been describing the basic tools with which our minds work: visual processes, memory, and the nature of information. With these, we need to build up a unified approach to learning, to problem solving, and to creative thinking. A first step is to look again at those pattern structures in our minds. They lead us to a total revision of our concept of note-taking. Standard notes contain a lot of wasted words. So we start by taking 2 sheets of blank paper, no lines, using centers for the main areas of interest, and the hook nature of words to develop patterns on paper that are projections of the images in our minds. The right-hand page is for essential linear and graphic information, our final 2-page notes. These patterns, although informative, still have the character of black and white photographs. However, the patterns in our minds are not just 2-dimensional, like photographs, but are more like holograms, the new 3-dimensional form of photography. so a few imaginative leaps can enhance patterns, making them much more meaningful representations of what's going on inside our heads. Relevant images and relevant lettering help trigger the correct recall when you come to review these notes. This method of projecting the patterns in our minds onto paper is essential to what I call the organic study technique. You'll recall that this is divided into two main sections: preparation and application. In preparation, the first two steps are deciding on the period of time for study and deciding on the amount to be studied. These two are linked by the concept Gestalt, the need for your mind to work in complete units. The time and amount should be organized in roughly 20 to 40-minute units to ensure that understanding and recall work in best harmony. The third and fourth steps involve making two 2-minute patterns, one on what you already know about the subject, the other on questions you want answered. This gives you a proper mental set. In other words, enables you to concentrate better. This leads to the second section of the organic study technique, application. The application consists of 4 main steps. Overview, in which you look at the basic framework, table of contents, indices, results, summaries and conclusions, graphs, photographs and illustrations, etc. Preview, in which you survey the printed text, concentrating on the beginnings and ends of paragraphs and sections. In view, where you fill in, define areas of difficulty without at this stage lingering over them, and also prepare to take notes. And finally, review, where you make your final pattern notes and sort out the remaining areas of difficulty. Remember the jigsaw puzzle? Building a jigsaw puzzle can be compared to the learning process. When you come to a difficult piece, put it to the side, wait for later, and carry on building up your pattern as you go. Another difficult piece, put it to the side. As the pattern develops and other difficult pieces are discarded, the general form begins to take shape. And those difficult pieces fit in easily. Once you have sorted out these areas of difficulty and finished your pattern notes, that particular study period is complete. You should review the patterns shortly after you have stopped studying. And remember, again at the end of a week and at increasing intervals. This will fix the information in your mind. During each further study period, you'll be making more patterns, adding, where appropriate, any bits and pieces of information you may come across from other sources. As these patterns develop, you will find your mind becoming increasingly more open to new associations and new material. Once you have a number of these pattern notes going, you can start sifting the information and building up a large master pattern, which will then become a reflection on paper of your overall grasp of the subject. This last program, I hope, has been doing just that. I have been reviewing previous programs, and you are building up an ongoing pattern of which this is a framework. Each bit of this pattern shows how every element of the course is inextricably interlinked to the rest. For instance, many memory techniques use key words. Key words are essential for patterns. Patterns are the basis for study, which is obviously linked to the ability to read and use your eyes, and so on. If you've followed these programs, you can now review each one in the light of the information from the others, and can go on expanding your own ability to use all that information. Well, this exemplifies what I hope from now on will be your new approach to learning and thinking. Having ongoing master patterns on your main areas of interest or study first keeps you up to date on all your knowledge and all the time stimulates your mind to a further inquiry. And secondly, it enables you to use the information for essay writing, speech making, minute taking, reports, problem solving, in fact, for anything that you need to do mentally. The fact that this information is stored in pattern form will make the task of writing easier and the results more meaningful and more coherent. What's so delightful about all of this is that the more you do it, the more rewarding it all becomes. Your mind really is freed, your imagination really does take off, and the whole process becomes a real pleasure. I'll leave you with our two ardent shed builders.
Mr. Linear Man and Mr. Pattern Man eagerly await the delivery of two kits from Constructor Shed Limited. Mr. Linear Man studies his instructions carefully, line by line. Meanwhile, Mr. Pattern Man keywords his instructions and begins to build up a fantastic pattern. Mr. Linear Man can't believe his eyes. Mr. Pattern Man already has that B7 in place. Sometime later, Mr. Pattern Man puts the final touch to his super constructor shed. Uh-oh, just look at that mess. Har, har, har.